All right, before I start, does anyone have any questions over HTML forms, which was covered in the recorded example, recorded lecture that I had for last week? All right, today's topic is tables. And as we start out, I want to make sure we understand exactly what I mean by a table. Think of a table as being something that could be in an Excel worksheet. That is something with rows and columns. And let's Google monthly budget example. Pretty good. Make it bigger. There we go. So monthly budget. There's categories going in rows. There's labor. This isn't a personal budget. This is for like construction or some kind of job where you have a category of tasks, a certain number of tasks. And then you have how many hours it's going to take, what the rate is per hour, how much materials you're going to use, and then a total. So this is what I mean by a table. There's rows and columns of data. The data is stored in a series of rows and columns. And again, the easiest way to think of this is anything in an Excel worksheet. So you think about this a little bit. With what we've covered so far, it would be difficult to do this in HTML because of the way that the browser handles white space. So if I did something like this, put the month, let's do this, expense, month, January, February, March, April, and so on, and put our expenses in rows. So electricity, maybe electricity, maybe $300, maybe $250, maybe $200, maybe $80. We continue and do something like this over and over again. This isn't going to work. Why isn't it going to work? It isn't going to work because the way the browser sees white space. And this is something we covered way back in the beginning of the course. What I mean by white space is blank space. So carriage returns, tabs, spaces, anything like that. So if we were to view this in our browser, we'd just get everything as one line. And that's clearly not what we want. We want a nice table with columns and rows. So for that, we use the table tag and related tags. And I did not hit record. Oh, I did hit record. Lucky me. All right. So let's look at a simple table. We'll start out looking at that, and then we're going to style it. So here is more like of what I want. I guess I have things switched around in this example. I have the months going down. I have the electric bill, type of bill, gas, housing, food going horizontally. Where I have rows and columns. And so, for example, the food budget for March is $123. I can see that because that's the intersection of this column and this row. All right, let's look at the tags that create this. I have this within an article. Typically, again, I noticed some of you have not been using the things that we discussed in the earlier labs, like section, header, and footer, and nav. You should be using those on all your assignments, because all your web pages can be separated into simple things like that, simple components like that. So all of your pages should have a header, all of your pages should have a nav, even if it's just an internal nav. All right, and all of your pages should have a section, and they should all have a footer. All right, in this example, within my article, I have a table tag. Table tag identifies the scope of the table. Everything between here and here is part of the table, and it's going to be treated as a table. There's three main tags associated with the table, and then a handful of other tags that are sort of supporting cast. All right, but the first main tag is a table tag that goes around the entire table. A table consists of a number of rows, and those rows are represented by TR tags. So if we want to know how many rows we have in this table, we would count the TR tags. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rows. And if I counted that, I would have 12 rows in this table. Each row consists of cells. All right, consists of a set of cells. And cells are either THs or TDs. All right. THs stand for table header. TDs stand for table data. So if we look at this example, by default, and again, this is only by default because we can use our CSS to change it however we want it to be. But by default, the THs are bold and centered, whereas the TDs are not bold and are left aligned. So if I look here, it's hard to tell with just this, but it's probably the only way you could tell is by looking at the month section. This January is a header, so it's centered within that month column. So is February, so is March. Now these might not look it, but they also are. It's just that the columns are as big as these headers are. Therefore, for them to be centered, it's hard to tell visually that that's the case. The data in the cells, though, are left aligned. So they line up with the left side of the table column. Normally, we're going to have the same number of cells in each row. So in this case, we have 5 cells. We have 5 THs for month, for electric bill, gas bill, housing, and food. All right. So we're going to have, normally, we're going to have, each row is going to have 5 either THs or TDs. Now, headings can either be column headings or row headings. This is an example of a row heading because this tells us what this row means. This represents January. And we can tell, again, visually, by looking at this, that this number right here is the gas bill for February. Simply because it's the intersection of the row and the column. Now, a question you might ask yourself, and we'll come back to this later, is what about people who can't see the page and are having a screen narrator read it to them? Well, we'll talk about how that is handled in a few minutes here. So, THs, TDs, table data, and table header. Pretty much for the most part, we're going to have the same number of cells in each row. The other tags we're going to leave for now. We're just going to talk about these main three: the table, the TH, and the TD. So how wide is a column? All right. A column is as wide as it needs to be. In other words, a column will be the width of its longest entry. So this column for month, if you notice, biggest entry in it is this string of X's. Therefore, it makes it that wide. Biggest field in this column is the words electric bill. And we make it that wide. Likewise, gas bill, housing, and food. If we were to make one of these bigger, one of these other fields bigger, let's say we're throwing a big party in February and we have a big bill for food. That column automatically becomes bigger. And notice we can see food is centered over that column because it's a TH. So how wide is the table? The table is as wide as it's is the sum of all the columns, essentially. With a space between each column. Now, this shows you the data in the table, but it's not necessarily very readable. This header is kind of hard to read, that this is supposed to say electric bill and this is supposed to say gas bill. So it would be nice to separate things out. And we can do that with CSS, because remember that CSS allows us to change the default behavior of something. So a table by default is going to make these columns as big as they need to be. Well, we can change that if we don't want them, if we want them to be bigger than that. All right, and we can do that via CSS. So I'm going to make a CSS file here. I am going to put it the same folder. What am I supposed to call this? Style CSS, or did I just say style? I'll rename it if it's wrong.
I think usually it's style.css, I think is what we've been using. I think it does something different.
Yeah, style.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. It could just be.
So let me go out and rename it. Actually, I'll do this. I don't want to confuse it. Save as style. I'll get rid of the other one. One thing I've noticed a lot of people have an issue with sometimes is they have issues with having a lot of copies of different things. They have copies of folders, copies of files, and so on. You want to be careful of that, because that can lead to trouble. All right. You could be making changes in one folder and turning in another folder, for example. I've had students do that any number of times. So it's okay to make like a backup of your work for backup, to deliberately make a copy of it, but be careful that you don't have too many copies of things and too many copies of files. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the width of this table. And we can give that table any width we want, and we can either give it either in terms of pixels or we can give it in terms of percentages. So I can say, for example, this table is 600 pixels wide. And if we do that, look, it becomes 600 pixels wide. Now, notice what the browser does here. The browser makes the columns wider, and it does it to proportion of the size of the column to begin with, if that makes any sense. So in other words, I just specified a size for the entire table, 600 pixels. Because electric bill is the biggest thing in this column, and gas bill is the biggest thing in this column, and electric bill is wider than the word gas bill, it made the electric bill column wider than the gas bill column. So it expands these columns proportionally. All right. So it figures out the ratio of the sizes of the field somehow, and or the column somehow, and changes it proportionally. All right. That's if we only give a width to the table itself. And of course, we can give percentages if we'd rather. And generally, that's a better way to do it. So we'll say width of 60%. And as the table gets narrower and wider, it expands to fill that space. Now, we might not want it to get this narrow, so we could put in a minimum width. Minimum width specifies don't make it any less than this. So I could say, for example, minimum width 350 pixels. So it will keep it at 60% of the page until it gets to be smaller than 350 pixels, and it won't make it any smaller than 350 pixels is what I mean to say. So if we go, making it smaller, it hits a point and it doesn't matter how wide it comes from there. I could change that to maybe 550 pixels if I wanted. This is very useful, by the way, when you're designing sites and you're using percentages for your widths. Because a lot of times and I've said this as a comment on a lot of people's pages, that your page looks good when the window is wide, but it doesn't look too good when the window is narrow. And things overlap each other and things such as that. One way to prevent that is by giving a minimum width of things. So you're going to make it a percentage of the screen up to a point, and then you won't make it any smaller than that. And by that, you get around having things looking bad when the window gets too narrow. By the same token, you can use maximum width. Maximum width is probably best used when you have an image, right? Because an image has a certain dimension to it. And if you set the image as being a percentage of the screen, it may try to make the image as displayed wider than the image actually as actual dimensions are. And that's not good. So you might put a maximum width on that to keep the width not getting bigger than the width of the actual image. And in that way you don't get pixelization of the blurring of the image. Okay. Now, what if we want the rows to be equal, or I'm sorry, the columns to be equal? Well, again, we can do that. One way to do that would be to give a percentage of the column. So I could say, give me each TH, and we only need to do it to the THs or the TDs, but we can say TH, give that a width. Since we have 5 of them, we're going to make it a width of 20%. And if we were to save that, we have then even columns. So as it expands those columns evenly. And as it gets to a certain size, and it won't go any smaller, it won't, keeps them even regardless of size. Now we could give conflicting instructions, right? We have 5 columns. What if we say we want each column to be 40% of the width of the table? Because remember, whenever we specify a width, it's the width of as a percentage, it's the percentage of the tag that contains it. So for example, in this case, when I say a width of the TH, that's based on the width of the TR, which is based on the width of the table. So if the table is 60%, and I specify that this is 40%, that would be 40% of the 60%, or 24%, I guess. But as you can see here, this is a not possible situation. With 5 columns, I can't possibly allocate 40% to each one. So what does the browser do? The browser tries. And this is what it did. It appears as though it did it as though we had no width assigned to the THs, because it made the electric bill much wider than electric bill column much wider than the gas bill column, and so on. Well, if we give something reasonable like with 20%, then it looks better. So my point is, if you give conflicting instructions to the browser, it's going to do something. All right. So I'm going to give these 4 a width of 40 pixels, right? And it makes them even spaced. Or does it? It makes them proportional. So it looks like if we make THs not make sense, it just divides them based on the width of the column. Browsers are very resilient in that way. If you compare writing HTML pages with coding in other languages, coding in HTML is very forgiving, because if you specify something impossible, the browser will take a shot and do its best to display what you have described. It might ignore some of your commands, like in this case, it ignored the command. But again, it will display something, as opposed to programming in other languages, whereas if you make a mistake, the program will likely crash. What if I wanted to make a specific column wider for whatever reason? Let's say I want to make the month column be, I'm going to do this to exaggerate. Well, no, let's not do it that much. Let's say I want to make the width of the month column 30%. All right. So I want to make the month column wider than the other columns. How can I do that? Well, you can do that by putting a class on the column. So I'm going to say class equals wide, or maybe a better one, because wide describes the appearance. Class equals main. So maybe this is the main column or whatever. Then I can specify in the style sheet Main have a width of 30%. And TH, I can say, has a width of 70 divided by 4.
70 divided by 4?
Yeah. Let's make this 40%. I don't feel like doing difficult math. So we'll make that 40%. So there is 60% among the other 4. So these widths would each be 15%. So let's look what that does. I didn't save everything. Makes that column wider, and then each of these are smaller than the month column.
So now my question is, because it's 17, it's what was that divided by 4? My question is, if it can handle decimals, because I just did the math and it's about 17.5.
I don't think it can handle decimals. That's why I changed it to 40%.
Oh, okay. Just wondering.
I'm sure it will do something, but it's not going to like split it in a half a pixel.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so how does this work? Again, let's review this because this is a case of cascading style sheets where the style cascades on. If I notice here, I have TH, the rule is the width is 15%. So by default, every TH gets a width of 15%, but those things with a class of main get a width of 40%. So this column has a class of main, so it gets a width of 40%. Remember, the more specific that you make a style rule, that's the one that's going to overrule the more general. So the TH says for all THs, the class of main says, well, just give me the things that have a class of main. So that is more specific than just saying all THs. So that rule of 40% is going to overrule the rule of 15%. This applies to other things too. Let's change it so that, let's get rid of these two. And get back to where we were before. Let's say that for some reason, again, we're going to have a party in February. So our food budget goes substantially higher. We'll say our food budget is $2,123 because we're having a big party in February. All right, we made it bigger, right? That's good. We might want to focus attention to that because that's the one thing that really stands out on here. All right. And we can do that by giving a class to the style to say high, for example. And we're going to tag all the things that we consider high with a class of high. So I can do that by saying the color red. Remember our talk on accessibility? We don't want to only use color. We want to draw attention to it in another way. And we can do that by saying font weight of bold. And then I can assign to whatever things I want to set apart in this, I can assign a class of high to. And that comes out as red and bold. Why a class and not an ID? Because there might be other things we want to assign that class to. Right here. Heating bill or electric bill for February is higher. So we're going to assign class of high to that. Now both of these stand out as being something that we want to show on the page. Remember, our job as web designers is to communicate something. You know, what message do we want to convey to the person seeing this page? You know, and therefore we're going to try to do it in as clear a way as possible. Now, this is still, I don't like the way this is where the electric bill is centered over this. So I'm going to center the TDs. And how do I do that? Well, it deals with the appearance. Therefore, it is going to be in the CSS code. Text align. Center. Now that looks a little easier to read to me. Other things that we can do style-wise. I just had one on the tip of my tongue and I can't think of it. Oh, what if we don't want that to be bold, but instead we want it to be another color? Well, again, we can override that. I could say TH color blue. Weight I mean, actually, let me Google this to see. I don't want it to be bold, but I don't want it to be lighter than normal. Oh, normal is 400. I thought that looked a little light. Yeah, that looks normal. All right. What if we want lines around these? What if we want to, and again, we can do a couple different things. What if we want lines in between them? All I want is horizontal lines in between them. I don't want to make it a grid yet. I just want to make horizontal lines. Well, I could specify on the TR border bottom and then specify 1px solid black. sure why that's not going. Let's try to put a border around all. Just specify this. And I can't put a style on a TR or a border on a TR. Let's put it underneath the TH. And this will put a border on all the THs. This will put it on all the TDs. Just the bottom border though. There we go. So that would do that. Now, one thing, if you might look, there's a tiny little gap between stuff. All right. You can get rid of that by putting an attribute on the table. Border collapse. Collapse. And what that will do is that will get rid of those little spaces. So it's it looks more like a continuous line. If we want borders in all four directions, in other words, top, bottom, right, and left, we can change that to border like that. And look like that. Oh, we should also do this on the TDs though as well. So I just did it on the TH. So now we have something that looks like that. And of course, we can do any other styling the way that we want to. So we could make the THs have a different background color. And so on. To get the table looking any way that we want it to. All right. Now on to some of the other tags that I said that we were going to ignore and we're going to come back to. One thing that you can do is you can group the table rows into header table, body table, and footer. So this is the header. So I have a T head tag around this row. The body of the table are all these rows. The footer is like a T body. The footer is like the last row, which shows the sum or the average or whatever. And then again, I can do things with that style-wise. And we get that. Now, what about the fact that those THs still are the dark color? Well, that's closer to it. That's a more specific style rule. So we could, if we wanted those, repeat this and say, well, in the T head section, any TH, I want the background of this color. And that will overrule it because that's more specific than TH to say within the header section, the TH. A cool thing that you can do that I never remember how to do, but I remember that I can do it and I remember how to Google it is table CSS alternate row color. And this shows you how to do it. And we get alternate rows in the table. This is very useful if you have a very wide table with a lot of numbers. If you think, as your eye moves across the screen, there's always a chance that your eye may jump up a line or jump down a line. These different color bands sort of keep your eye and focused on the right thing. In the old days, computer printer used to be green bar, computer paper rather, used to be green bar paper, where you'd print on papers that had light green bars, and it was for that very reason, to help people be able to align it. It in fact is the same reason that newspapers are done in columns, right? If you read something going across the whole width of the page, that'd be difficult to read, but if you put it in small little things or do like this, alternate the colors, it's useful. All right, couple more tags and then we'll wrap this up. Caption tag. Important tag should be on all your tables and it simply describes what the table means. So this is a sample monthly budget. We probably want to set that off somehow, and we can do that via CSS, caption. Font size 1.4 M. That sets it off. The other thing that we can do is notice within all this, all the THs, I either have a scope of col, C-O-L, or the scope of row. This has no effect on the table for people that can see. There's no visual impact of it. However, these things help a sight impaired user to understand what the number means. So for example, if they're down here and they get this number 2123, the way that the screen reader would read it would be across the column. So it would say month, electric bill, gas bill, housing, food, February, 423, 123, 1234, 2123. Well, at that point, you're liable to forget the person that cited, like, what column is that? And what row are we on? That scope of col and row are useful in helping people with vision impairment use their screen reader technology to determine what column and row a value is in. All right, I think that's it for tables. In the bad old days, people used tables for layout, which I don't even want to get into that. I probably shouldn't even mention that to get that thought out of your mind. And that led to very, very, very messy websites with a lot of extra code. Thank goodness CSS has advanced from then, and we can use like some of the things like Flexbox and grids to create better layouts. Are there any questions about any of this? All right, we will either see you in lab or we will see you next week. Take care.